What's up, guys? Welcome to Unprofessional. I'm your host, Trevor Greenbaum. In this one, I talk with Heather Hutchinson. She was blind since birth. Well, she's still blind, but she was blind since birth as well. And we have a pretty good discussion. I think it's relatable to everybody, even though, she's been through so much. We talk about her being in the psych ward, her going through life blind and how that can apply to you, and we have a pretty good discussion. I think there's a lot to learn there. So without further ado, here is me and Heather. So one of the reasons I work hard every day, guys, is so I can be among great people that the world has to offer. And today I'm happy to be talking to someone who has definitely seen great adversity and has had the courage to fight through it and come out the other side. It's a trait I always admire, and it kind of keeps me going every day, honestly. So I'm happy to be talking to today award-winning singer and Amazon best-selling author, Heather Hutchinson. So thanks for coming on, Heather.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. There's important things to know about you. And while it's not someone's deficits that define them, it's how you act in the face of the deficits. But it's important to know what those deficits are, because it's an important part of everybody's story, right? And you have been blind since birth,
Yes.
right? And it's impossible to ask you, I was thinking, how do I ask her questions about being blind and growing up like that? Because you don't have the experience of seeing. Yeah. So it's hard to say, because you don't have that to compare it to, but I guess everyone has their own story and experience. So I guess I'll just start by, how was your experience growing up?
It was pretty normal up until probably kindergarten, because you're kind of self-absorbed as a little kid. You're hanging out with your family. So nobody, I kind of just did whatever my brother and my cousins were doing. Nobody really said that I couldn't. And then when I started school, I guess was around the time that other kids started treating me differently. And then I started noticing that adults were doing it too. So other kids would come up to me and be like, "Oh, how many fingers am I holding up?" Stuff like that. So I'd just give them the middle finger and be like, "I don't know, how many fingers am I holding?"
Would you actually?
Yeah.
So you didn't start to realize that things were different for you compared to everyone else until grade school?
Yeah.
Okay. And at that point, what was the thinking that was taking hold of you? Oh, I'm different than everyone else, and that's a bad thing?
Yeah, I think because the first time I really noticed it, I was playing on the playground with this kid that was a couple of years older than me. And we were just the only two kids on the playground that day. And we were playing, having a good time. And he asked me why I didn't look at anything. And I didn't really think anything of it at the time. I just said, "I'm blind," kind of, "Oh, I have brown hair and blue eyes," same sort of thing. And his reaction was so sudden and so violent. He shoved me backwards off the slide and ran away and got on his bike and pedaled away while he yelled insults about me being blind. So that was really the first kind of dramatic moment, I guess, that I realized that I was different. And I remember laying there on the playground as he left and thinking all these little things kind of clicked into place, and I was like, wow, I am different, and different's not a good thing, so I'm gonna try and hide it.
That almost seems like a scene out of a movie, and they
I know, right?
they try to make the bully to be out such a bad person, and you're like, that never happens. There's no way that they're that bad. But wow, that's wild. What do you I mean, specifically about that situation, what did at the time, of course you thought, wow, I'm different and this person reacted in that way, but I mean, what were your thoughts over time of that situation?
I think of that situation in particular, looking back on it as an adult, I have to wonder where that kid learned it from, because, he got it from somewhere. And, clearly he was raised to, I guess, fear difference.
Yeah, and then he just reacted in some sort of negative way, because he just, I don't know, either was supposed to fear it because he learned that, or just was confused, and that was just how he ended up reacting, I suppose.
Yeah, I think, fear gets so closely tied into anger. So sometimes when we're afraid of something, we react with anger or aggression. And I think that's probably what was going on there.
Mm. And that's honestly one of the main things I wanted to talk about today. I've been thinking about a lot lately is courage. And courage is, I think by definition, the facing fear to do something that you feel is right or should be done.
Hmm.
But the whole point of courage is that you need that first part is the
Hmm.
fear.
Yeah.
And, there's people walking around today, some of them are very successful, like CEOs. Some of them are, the homeless or whatever, but they're, like almost psychopathic. They don't feel the fear. And that's not necessarily a good or admirable thing. It's feeling that and then doing what you feel is best in that situation, regardless of what could happen to you or what the consequences might be.
Hmm.
And so that's cool. But I guess we should talk about how you've come through all that. So you started to realize at that point that you are different
Hmm.
and that you're starting to realize it's almost a bad thing.
Yeah.
So what's the next step? What was the next step in the story here?
I think the next step was, I was really trying to for a couple of years there because, I think that happened when I was 5. So you don't really. So I would try to hide it. And, if anybody ever asked me about it, I never answered that question again. Why don't you look at anything? Like I would just try to avoid that question. And I had like a really good, solid core group of friends, but there definitely were, issues with kids growing up, and it kind of, I guess, affects you don't feel worthy, maybe.
Mm. You don't feel worthy of like having the friends that you have or just having any of the things that you do, or you just don't feel worthy in general?
You just don't feel like, I don't know, I guess you don't feel like you matter. And yeah, sometimes
Mm.
I think even with like having the friends that I had, we would go to an amusement park or something like that. And inevitably, as we got older, one of them would kind of have to stay behind with me and be my guide because I couldn't navigate all the stairs and
Mm.
obstacles and things as fast as everybody else could.
Mm.
And, I was really aware of that growing up. I
Mm.
think in a way it was a blessing and in a way it was a curse to be so self-aware so young because it just makes you question everything, like why are these people even bothering to hang out with me, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And you almost feel like not only that you can't like contribute to the group, but almost like a nuisance at that point, I
Yeah,
suppose.
totally. Hmm.
Dang. So you feel like you're almost dragging your friends down at that point.
Yeah.
Um, so, and while I feel like that might be something that everyone can relate to some extent, I don't know, about fully, but I think everyone kind of has that kind of a feeling with something, whether it's as major as that or maybe something crazier or less so.
Hmm.
And I think it's important, and that's part of why a lot of people are entering therapy now and things like that, is to discover what that is that makes them feel that way, and then, hopefully overcome it. So you started to feel like a nuisance at this point, after feeling different and realizing that might be a bad thing.
Hmm.
Um, so what's the next step now you are entering a period of life that a lot of people find difficult, like adolescence.
Yes.
How are you start gripping with things at that point?
So I think anxiety really started for me probably around 7. And at the time, I hope it's changing. I'm not really sure. But at the time when I was growing up, it was like, they would take me to the pediatrician because I would be sent home from school sick all the time because I would be so anxious.
Mm.
And the pediatrician is kind of like, well, she's just anxious. She'll grow out of it. It's fine, which is really unfortunate because, when you're a kid, that's the best chance that they have to intervene and kind of stop those patterns before they become so ingrained. So by early adolescence, I think the anxiety had kind of led to the depression that followed because, nobody wants to feel like that all the time. You feel sick all the time. you question everything. And so it just kind of gets to the point where you're like, well, I don't want to do this anymore.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, you were almost having signs being sent out to everybody. Like, look, things aren't going good for me. I'm being very anxious and it's causing me a physical illness, which is a real thing. It's well, so I'm done right now. Somatosensory, and it like actually causes physical feelings of pain and from the anxiety and such. So you were sending out these signals, and it seemed like nobody was reading them. Is that how you felt? Like that? Oh, no one's seeing what I'm feeling, and
Yeah, I think so. So I think I would just, I got to the point where I tried to, play my cards really close and just not even show that to people because, again, I think, people kind of react like, oh, you're just being a nuisance again. You're overreacting, whatever it might be. So you try and just, hide that, which is really unfortunate by the time it gets to depression because then you start to hide that as well.
Did you feel like you had somebody to confide in or tell these things to?
Not really. No, it kind of felt like nobody really fully got it. It was kind of always this thing of, oh, you'll grow out of it. It'll be fine when you get older.
I feel like the main problems I run into when I'm trying to look for help or advice from somebody is they either do that thing like, oh, maybe you'll grow out of whatever difficulty you're experiencing, or which is even more frustrating in my opinion, is the sympathy, but no like empathy. Like, oh, wow, it must be really tough being blind. Like, I can't imagine. It's so hard, and then it's just period. That's it, like, oh, that sucks, and sometimes that's good to hear. It's like, okay, this person really, understands me or whatever. But it's like, okay, now let's work through this, let's find some actionable steps where we work through this,
Yeah, there's nothing actionable there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So now things are starting to get pretty bleak, and maybe in your own head. You feeling like what? You can't reach out to anyone to have a real conversation with. You are feeling like a nuisance with your friends, maybe even your family. And you're starting to get into a depression at this state.
Yes.
And how old are you right now at that time?
13.
Okay, 13.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are your what's going on next?
So I was called actually to the school counselor's office because somebody had contacted her and was concerned about my safety. So I started meeting with her and a psychologist outside of school and a social worker, and that kind of went on for a couple of years. And then I kind of got to the point where I'm like, oh, I don't really need this anymore. I'm fine. And I was for a couple of years, but, like major depressive episodes, they come and they go. So you think, oh, I've beaten this. And then a couple months later, a year later, or whatever, you're back in the midst of that spiral again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thing I see in myself as well as, a lot of other people, and seeing depressed patients when I'm in the hospital is it's always a roller coaster, right? I mean, you're going to go through highs and lows, and this sounds kind of corny, but it's true. You go through the highs and lows, and no matter how good you feel or how much you feel like you've understand things now compared to when you did before, things are going to confuse you again. The waters will become muddled, and you're going to have to go through another time of trying to understand things and go through your past and things like that. So, yeah, I guess the lesson there, if there's one to be learned, is you never have it all figured out. There's no finish line. There's no finish line. That's the bottom line. But that's a tough thing for a 13-year-old who's trying to come to grips with being completely different than everyone around them, right? I can imagine anyway.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there were some, troubles at home with family and things like that. So it just really all culminated in this one depressive disaster.
Tell them more about your family life at that point. So what kind of problems were you running into then? I know you were feeling like a nuisance at some points, oh, why even go to this event when, I'm just going to be holding people back and such.
Yeah, so my family, my dad was diagnosed with cancer when I was 3, and then he was kind of in and out of remission for a couple of years. He left when I was 6 for the first time, and then came back and left again when I was 13 for the final time, and then he got really sick again right after he left. So, and we didn't really have a relationship, and then I'm finding out that he's sick again, and in the weird way of a teenager, you're kind of self-absorbed and you're almost thinking, well, maybe this is my fault.
Yeah, 100%. One thing that I think this day and age that we run into is the difference between what should I take responsibility for and what shouldn't I? So like, I think that's a pretty prime and maybe obvious example in hindsight of, maybe I shouldn't take responsibility for this, right? Maybe it was the circumstances that played into this. Yes. But then, so many people are running into the victim mentality where it's, look, the system is bogging me down. It's making me feel this way. It's making me do that. My parents did this to me. And so I'm ruined, right? But,
which helps no one.
Which helps nobody, right? But there is something important to understanding about when something is circumstantial or when something that you can take responsibility for and act on.
Yes.
So at this point, were you, I mean, you were pretty young, but would you be able to understand that kind of a concept? I mean, I know you had been going through something like that at an early age makes you, I feel, maybe extra aware of everything around you compared to the average person.
Yeah.
Were you starting to think about these things yet, or did that come later on?
You mean like when he was
like
first
that? Yeah. So like taking the responsibility for that. I mean, you took responsibility for his sickness to some extent. You're like, oh, some way isn't my fault. Like, at what point did you start to maybe, work around that and figure out that maybe that's not the case?
Probably the end of high school to the first couple of years of university.
So what were the events that led up to that?
I think just like you said, getting more self-awareness of, okay, this is something I can control. This is something I can't control, and really putting those things into 2 different categories. Kind of, okay, I can do something about this. I can't do something about this. This was caused by me. This wasn't caused by me.
Mm-hmm. So in general, what do you think are some misconceptions about people who are blind that people have?
I think a big one is that we are, I don't know how to put this nicer, but that we're stupid. So, I'll go out to a restaurant and, for example, and the waitress will either not talk to me at all. So she'll talk to whoever I'm with. Oh, what does she want to eat? Or she'll talk to me like I'm like 3 years old, with the whole like baby voice and everything, which is really...
That's so demeaning. Oh, man.
Yes, it is. And it almost makes me want to like start talking back with that same voice, and like maybe then they'll get it, that it's ridiculous.
One thing that I've seen around, so I'm from an international medical school, and we have people from all over the place who go there, whatever, Africa, Asia, the Americas, everywhere. So, and it's in the Caribbean, and we see so many people who speak many different languages and stuff. And I've seen a similar thing with that. So someone who, like half knows a language, your first instinct is to be like, oh, he's not smart. She's not smart. Mm-hmm. Like, and it's hard because that is genuinely your first instinct, whether you like it or not, no matter how good of a person you are. I think it's pretty universal. Yeah. But then you have to think past that and just, reconcile the fact that, hey, if I only knew half a language, I might seem stupid, but I'm not, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because you're going to sound like, a bit of a toddler when you're speaking a language you don't speak, but that doesn't mean that you're not very proficient and intelligent in your own language.
Mm-hmm. And so in those earlier years, were you able to forgive the people who like treated you that way, such as the waiter who would come by and treat you like, with the baby voice? Were you able to like forgive them yet for that? That would be pretty tough for somebody at a young age, I feel.
Yeah, it was hard. It just felt like, I'd try to educate as many people as I could, and it was never enough. There was always, another waiter that was going to do the same thing or whatever. So it just felt like I can't fix this. Like, I'm in a situation that I can't wake up for, like, on the really bad days. Like, this is a nightmare. I can't wake up from this. I can't make people stop treating me like this, because even if I get through to one person, it's going to be like, how many more are there to educate? It's never ending, and I can't fix it.
Right. And you're not exactly going to wear a shirt that says, "Hey, I'm blind." And then there's like a paragraph about, "Hey, like, I understand just as much as you," and like this and that, and then it's just almost seems like, oh, this person just wants attention because they're blind.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. I don't know. I still haven't figured out the magic bullet to educating people without, being over the top. Like,
yeah. Well, I think there's a lesson in there somewhere. I mean, you want to educate people on difficult topics, but you can't like force it on the people who either aren't willing to listen or just aren't important to the conversation in the first place. Like that person walking by on the street, and they might give you a funny look or say a certain thing, but do they really matter in the context of everything? Like, does it really matter? What they say?
Yeah, and I think that's the point that you have to get to, or you'll just drive yourself crazy.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that I imagine with great adversity such as this is you either become stronger because of it or it defeats you, right?
Yes.
And so tell us about the time when you started to feel defeated by this.
I think it was on and off for a lot of years with my major depressive episodes. It would all kind of coincide to, oh my God, I can't fix this. This will never change. So, you have that like hopelessness going on. And especially when I was in one of my episodes, which, could range anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months or even up to a year, where, I'd stop eating, I'd stop sleeping, my hair would start falling out, all that kind of thing.
Your hair would genuinely start falling out?
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah.
Okay. So you started to have these types of feelings, and what were you doing at the time at this point? Like, what was your like day to day?
I was in university, then I got out of university. I traveled. I went to live abroad for a year, and that was actually probably the best year, the least. There were no depressive episodes. It was
what caused you to travel? Like what transpired? What were you thinking?
Well, I grew up kind of surrounded by the Latin American community in Canada, and to make like a really big generalization here, Canadians tend to have like one of two responses to my blindness. Okay. Either they like get super awkward about it, and to the point where like they don't even some people get really awkward about it and that's all they want to talk about. Some people get so uncomfortable with it that you can tell that they're like studiously avoiding the topic, which is awkward too. Mm-hmm. And some people try to pretend that they're totally cool with it by like cracking jokes and things like that, which is cool. I like a good blind joke as much as the next person. But I've heard them all. Like, people are a lot less original than they think. So they'll like crack these jokes and I'll just be like, But on the other side, I think people from Latin America, and I don't really know why, but they're a lot more observant. So they ask a lot fewer questions, but they observe a lot more, and they just don't get weird about things. I don't know what it is, but so having grown up like kind of surrounded by that, I wanted to go to a country and be completely immersed in it, to go to this place and be different for a different reason. So to be like the girl from Canada instead of always the blind girl.
Right. Go over there and be the white girl from Canada. Look at this girl. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's an interesting take on it. Yeah, I think that's a decent thing for people to appreciate, although it's another one of those that it's hard to get into people's heads unless they are really trying to like change something, is the maybe listen and observe things before, you start taking action or saying things about something, right?
Yeah.
But but there's also the other side of it too, which is it's important to start taking action on something before you just keep thinking about it, and then you never take action. You could have, for instance, easily never traveled or taken that chance. But you're like, I'm going to take this action, even though it's scary.
Yeah, totally.
So you go to Latin America, which country again?
Peru.
Okay. And you had a great experience there. People were more, I guess, just understanding and just in that context.
Yes.
Okay. And then you come back, and do you have troubles again? Is it bad again?
Yeah. So at the airport, getting off the plane, the very first conversation I had was with this guy. Well, I didn't even have the conversation with him because he wouldn't talk to me directly. He was talking to my partner who was with me. And he goes, "What's wrong with her? Was she born that way?"
Oh my God.
And this is like the first interaction I've had with anybody in Canada for the past year. And it, like, something like that didn't happen to me even once when I was in Peru, whereas like here it's almost a daily occurrence. So
oh man, is it really?
Yeah, it happens a lot. So it was like this. I've been back in Canada for 5 minutes, and I remember exactly why I wanted to leave in the first place.
That surprises me. I didn't think that it would be an everyday thing in the U.S., but that's crazy.
Yeah.
Why do you have no idea? I mean, I'm sure you've thought about it. Why is it just a cultural thing? Is it because you had something else that stood out besides that and in South America, or what are your thoughts on it?
I think it almost might be like the culture of us in North America is we almost feel entitled to information. So we want to know something, we're going to find it out. We don't care how we do that. We just want to know.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And there's something kind of cool about that where it's like, look, the end is very important here, and it is, but yes, maybe there's a better way to go about it.
yeah I mean, knowledge is power, but you can't just stop
and some things
in like the grocery store to ask like, oh, what's it like to be blind? I don't know, what's it like to be sighted? Like
yeah, and some things are okay to not know,
yes,
like if someone's got like a mark on the side of their head or something, like, yeah, maybe it's a good conversation starter, but also maybe just keep doing your thing. Like, maybe you don't need to.
They've probably been asked about that 10 times already today, and they don't need to be asked about it.
Right. 100%. Okay. So you have this bad conversation with this guy, and I'm sure it's not the only experience you've had with that.
No.
And so you go back onto the roller coaster when you kind of come back, although I'm sure you were still on it somewhat when you were in Peru.
Yeah, to a certain extent. It was definitely better, but yeah, it was still there.
Mm-hmm. And I want to get back to travel again later, but
okay.
What's the next step here? I mean, you... At some point, you go all the way down deep end, right? Let's get to that. Yeah,
so I come back from Peru. We move around a little bit. We settle in a really small town. There was no public transportation or anything, so I really lost a lot of independence, and it was hard to find a job. So things just were, my self-worth was kind of non-existent at that point. And of course, I entered into a major depressive episode in, I guess, November of 2018. And that one didn't really end like the others had. It just kind of went on and on and on. And it got to the point, I think, in June of 2019, I set up an emergency appointment with one of my doctors, and they were able to keep me out of the hospital that time. They adjusted my medication, made sure that I was getting more outpatient mental health supports and things like that. So it was definitely helping. Things were improving. And then in March of 2020, we all know what happened then. And I think I wasn't far enough into recovery. So my doctors stopped seeing patients in person. We didn't have even video calls back then. It was just like these phone conversations. So they didn't really see like the physical signs of what was going on. They were harder to reach. My therapists were harder to reach. Appointments with psychiatrists were like, everything was so backed up and so delayed. And it just got to the point where, yeah, I couldn't cope anymore. And I felt completely out of control. And the one thing I realized that I could control is how and when I would die.
Wow. So you go through all this.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that's heavy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, things took a little bit of a turn.
So, okay. What before we continue on, what was helping you with you were taking the medication, you were taking the visits with the in person before this, right?
Yes.
Then they switched to televisits.
Mm-hmm.
First, talk about that. It just was it less personable? Was it they just couldn't see as many signs? What was going on? What do you think fell there?
I think it was just such a hard time for everybody. Nobody knew what was going on, and I think it was really challenging for people in the medical community. So, it was harder to make doctor's appointments. They would call, but they would, kind of be distracted, and because they're trying to manage all this other stuff and not seeing people in person, like it was a huge shift, I think, for everybody. So I think that they were a little less attentive maybe, and there just wasn't that personal, like, oh, I can see the physical signs that you're struggling.
And it's not exactly, I mean, it's a combination of things. I mean,
Yes.
we can imagine it's first of all, just extra stress on the medical system, and then a complete change in how things are done. I mean, it's completely on camera now. I mean, among other things. So, okay. So things definitely fell there. Was there anything else? I mean, you were staying at home. You couldn't really go anywhere, and that all had a toll on you as well.
Yeah, I think a big thing for me was when I would go through these major depressive episodes, I would make these like survival goals, like I can't kill myself until I take one last trip to visit my friends in Mexico, or I can't kill myself until my friend comes to visit, or whatever it was, or until I finish this recording project that I'm working on to make a new album, whatever it was. And all of those things. So I would like kind of obsessively count down to when these things would happen so that I could keep going. Then COVID comes, and I don't know when any of that's going to happen. So all of a sudden there's like no incentive.
So one thing that I can draw a comparison to, and I think that's all a lot of us can really do to understand each other with some things, is to a much smaller extent, of course, when I'm on a run, right? Let's say this is one of the longest runs I've done, and I'm dying by the end of this run, right? I'm like, let's say I'm only like halfway. I'm thinking, okay, fine. You can quit early. It's okay. Like, I'll forgive you, but you have to go until this point.
Yeah.
And so I would do it. I would like, okay, fine. Just one step, another step, another step. I'm dying. And then, all right, I'm getting close to that point. I just counting down. I'm like, God, can I just get there, please? And then I get there, right? Oh, I hit the stop sign. Okay. Well, okay. I'm going to just do everything I can to just go a little more. I know I'm not going to make it, but I'm going to go a little bit more. So I do. And then I keep going a little bit more. And then I'm like, you know what? It's crazy. I couldn't believe it before, but I might just be able to make it. And then I finish my run. And that's like almost a daily occurrence. Like, and it's on a much smaller extent, but I can kind of see how that thinking is similar.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy, I think.
Okay. So you are just counting down these days, like, all right, I owe it to this person to see them one more time. I maybe just experience this one last thing, before I call it.
Yeah.
So that's what you're thinking at this point. COVID hits, and you're unable to do a lot of these things.
Yeah.
Which a lot of us have been unable to do our normal events, and
Totally.
that's tough too. it's just so hard to draw these comparisons between these, like, because like the thing, I'm thinking of an example of like, oh, a person couldn't like go to the grocery store that they like very much anymore at the hours they wanted, and that can deeply affect somebody, like that was their thing every day, and it kind of made them feel good, or whatever the case is. And but for you you couldn't do these things that were like just keeping you alive, essentially.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you're going through this. What's the next step? So you're going through all this. How did we keep going down? How far did we keep going down?
Yeah. So basically it got to the point where I was, still breathing, but it's hard to explain if you haven't been there, but you're just like practically comatose. Like you're just not functioning at all. So finally I decided, no, like this is stupid. I'm not going to do this anymore. So, I got my affairs in order, made firm plans for how and where and when. But before that, I was like, you know what? I made this safety plan with my therapist back when I started seeing him. And the last step, like I had to sign it and everything. The last step was, when all else fails, go to the hospital. So there were like these, like a column with signs that I was spiraling, then what to do about them from, least invasive to most invasive. And the last thing on that list was go to the hospital. And so I thought, you know what, I'll go. And I don't have any interest in getting better. I'm just going to go for absolution because I'm going to go there. They're going to be like, okay, you're fine, go home. And then once I'm gone, my family and my loved ones can look at that and be like, well, she tried.
You're like, oh, I did all the steps. I did what I could. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So you go to the hospital. So you told your mom and then you went to the hospital, or how did that go?
Yeah, I told my partner. And he was like really relieved by that point because it's so hopeless and helpless when you're watching somebody struggle like that too, because what do you really do about it? And I think there's this misconception that, I don't know how it works there. I guess in every state it's different, but there's this misconception that your family members can have you locked up just because. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, what? Okay.
So like they can't, when you're an adult, they can't just drive, like put you in the car and force you to go.
Right. Okay.
So, like a paramedics or the police or whatever would have to be involved. And then once you get to the hospital, it has to be a physician that makes that call. A family member can't do it. So I think a lot of people were like, oh, why didn't your family do more?
Intervene.
Because, yeah. Like it's so easy to say that in hindsight and looking at it from the outside, but there's a lot less, I think, that people can do than they realize, maybe against someone's will.
Yeah, it's easy to like see a movie or something about this and be like, I would intervene, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Especially with the law options you have, because essentially it's up to you at the end of the day. I mean, whether you want to do whatever action.
Yes, yeah. And once you get there, they can hold you. So basically what happened for me is things didn't work out as planned, obviously. I went there and they decided, they were like, no, we're going to admit you as an involuntary patient. So which basically just meant I didn't have the freedom to leave. And, the psych ward was locked and everything. So there was, nowhere really to go.
So you're locked in this asylum, essentially. What are you thinking at this point?
So the morning I went, they weren't really letting anybody into emergency because of COVID, like any family members or anything, but they let my partner go with me so he could escort me. And they took me immediately to psychiatric emergency services. I think every hospital probably calls it something a little bit different, which I had these locking doors, obviously. So I talked to a crisis nurse, then sat around for a bit. Then the ER doctor came, and she was the one that did all the paperwork and everything for my admission. So Jordan, my partner, was still sitting there through all this, so he had to like see what was going on in the emergency psych, which was you know not the
It's not the prettiest scene in the world.
no, it's not at all. So finally I get admitted and they say, okay, you have to leave. And so he stands up and he goes through this door, and it's this huge, heavy, locking metal door.
Yeah.
And so the door like slams behind him, and you
It's a
hear
little
like the
intimidating.
electronic
Oh my
like
God.
noise of the lock going home or whatever. And I remember just sitting there and thinking like, this is the end of the road. Like, no matter what happens from here, like, this is it.
And again, I can only imagine, but there can't be anything more alienating than being locked away from everyone else. Like, you're so different that we have to like put you into here.
Yeah, and it's COVID, so there's no visitors for the entire time you're there.
That can't help.
No, because like you want somebody to, you want to see somebody in that visitor's chair next to your hospital bed sometimes, and there's just nobody. You're going through it, essentially alone. They let me keep my cell phone, which was nice.
So how long are you in this area then? Because this is the ER.
Yeah, so I spent 3 days in the psych ER and then got moved to this, they call it PES. Or no, sorry, the IPU. PES is Psych Emergency Services, which is Inpatient Psychiatric Unit. And then I was there for about another week.
Okay. And during this time, you wake up each day. I'm assuming, take your medications that they give you.
Yeah.
And were you eating your food? Were you just doing your normal activities, or how was that all going?
Well, I was admitted not eating at all. Like, I'd gotten to the point where I couldn't eat solid food anymore. And so I was like, when they weighed me, I was 30 pounds less than what I would have guessed my lowest guess would have been. So, so initially there was like a lot of nutritional therapy and like really small, really frequent meals.
Yeah, we see in the ER and in other areas too, but people who come in who are very, very old, right? And have like chronic illnesses and stuff. And we start to see that they're kind of like wasting away, not eating solid food and stuff. But how old are you at this point?
Yeah, no, I'm no, like this was just last year. So.
Yeah, so that's crazy.
I was doing it to myself.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you start to eat food after what, a week or so, or how was that going?
A couple of days. It was actually like really surprising to me how quickly I could eat, because it was almost like this, like I got locked away and I was really unhappy about it, obviously, and scared and stuff. But there was also this kind of like relief of like, okay, the decision's been made for me. I won't die today, so I can relax a little bit.
You don't even have the choice in the matter for that anymore. So you may as well relax at this point. Exactly.
Yeah. I'll figure it out later. But, for today, the choice has been made for me.
That's wild. Again, the smallest, connection here ever, but I think it might be there is, okay, I'm going out to this like party or something, and I'm very anxious, right? I'm very anxious about going to it. There's gonna be people there that I know, but not everybody, and I'm worried, and am I gonna go, am I not gonna go? I decided I'm gonna go, I told people I'm gonna go, but at the last second I'm like, yeah, maybe I'm not, I'm not cut out for this. I got other things to do, a million excuses to go through your head, and then sorry, the party's canceled,
yes.
Then relief. Oh.
Yes, totally. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
No,
or
like a perfect example.
Or even the other way. Oh, the party's at your house now, and it's right here, right now. It's like, I don't have an option. It's in my place. I can't escape. Yeah. I may as well just accept this party, and I'm going to start talking to people, I guess either way.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. So yeah, I'm just trying to like make some connections, because otherwise, it's easy. It's easy for people to be like, oh, this person went through this wild experience, and you can't relate to it.
Yeah.
Because I've never been to a psych unit, I've never had to be locked in somewhere. Like I just never happened, right? And then you just go, wow, that's a courageous thing that person did, or that's a wild thing that person went through. But I think there's some connections you could draw to things in your daily life.
Yeah, totally. Like that relatability, because it is like, if you haven't gone through it, it does sound crazy. And, you explain these things to people and they're like, well, there's no logic to that.
Yeah, because I've truly never felt like a comatose state where I just don't want to. Of course, I've had lazy days, right?
Yeah.
But I've never felt like I just don't want to eat all day and nothing matters except maybe doing that last thing before I like kill myself. Like I've definitely never experienced that. So yeah, maybe this is the way we can try to like relate through it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've been there about a week or so. You've been eating food again. Yeah. You have felt some relief because you no longer have that decision to make anymore. You may as well just do your thing, live in this moment. Now what?
So the first couple of days was really like just kind of doing whatever they wanted, but like I didn't really care. I was just biding my time, right? Like, okay, one of these days they're gonna have to let me out of here, and then I can continue on. But I guess it was, almost a week into it, and I was lying awake one night. I couldn't sleep. They were, I think when they adjust your psych meds out of the psych ward, they do it a little bit more gently. When you're in the psych ward, it's like, well, you're here, so we're just gonna like pull out all the stops, and it's gonna suck for you, but you're here, so so oh well.
100%. I've 100% seen that, and they're like, well, look, we can take care of this person. If they go through some drastic change, like, okay, well, they're right here. They have the best medical attention possible, so let's go for it. Let's like run them through the wall. Let's see if we can break through.
Yeah.
Wow.
Totally.
So that must have been some interesting experiences.
The side effects were insane. It was awful. So I couldn't sleep. That was one of them. I was almost like in this kind of weird euphoric state just because of all the med changes that they've been doing very drastically. And the medevac helicopter comes and it lands, and right afterwards they call a code blue. And so I'm laying there and I start thinking about this patient and like,
who can't breathe.
Their poor family, like they're having one of the scariest nights of their lives. And I'm like, wait a second, how can I feel so much empathy for their family, but I know the decision I want to make is going to devastate my own family? And then I started thinking about the patient themselves, and there was just this crazy juxtaposition of, okay, they're here fighting to live. I'm here fighting to die. I have a choice in the matter. They might not. And it was like this moment where like, okay, I have to choose now. I'm either going to become an active participant in my treatment plan and get better, get well enough to get out of the hospital so I can tell my story, so I can use this as, something bigger than what it was. So my life wasn't just, this wasted tragedy kind of thing, turn something really awful into hopefully something good to help other people who are going through it and educate people who haven't gone through it.
Were you having all of those thoughts at that time, or was that something that you started to generate? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. It was like this moment of clarity, I guess.
Was it all that evening with that helipad, with the code blue, with all of that? It really hit home, huh?
Yeah, and things definitely got worse before they got better after that, because all of a sudden you're actually trying, and stuff starts to hurt.
Yeah, right.
And stuff gets really hard because all of a sudden you care. So yeah, it wasn't like this magical, like, oh, everything is better now and it's all solved. All of a sudden it's like there's so much grief and trauma and things that you're actually trying to process because you actually want to get better.
You don't just have the moment of clarity and then everything
No,
is easier. You have the moment of
no.
clarity and then you start to work toward things being better. And it's like the worst pain of your
Yes.
life.
Yeah.
You can't be, you're like the 300-pound guy who decides, oh, you know what? I'm going to lose weight and I'm going to run a marathon one day. You don't just, like that first run feels
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah. You don't start with the marathon.
No, you definitely don't. You definitely don't. Okay, wow. But I mean, here's the thing though. You kind of decided at that point you wanted to like run the marathon. Like you weren't just, I'm gonna come out of this and be like good enough each day and like enjoy my life. You were like, I'm gonna be an active participant in my care and hopefully and I want to genuinely like create a better experience for other people by like sharing my story and things like that.
Yes.
I mean, that's the marathon. You decided at that point, I am going to run the marathon. And I think that's kind of how it is too with the fat guy.
Yeah.
like, like he decides like, I'm going to do this big goal.
Yeah.
And then, and then you got to take one step at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. It totally is. It's tiny, tiny, tiny steps towards hopefully something better.
Mm-hmm. So what were your first steps?
My first steps were, well, the next day actually in group. Why do they have group therapy in some sports? It's like a really terrible. I mean, I get why
You don't
they
like
do
it?
but like I get that it's
Yeah.
expedient or whatever because then they're you have your private therapy every day with the psychiatrist, and then you have your little sessions that they kind of break up throughout the day with the psych nurses.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they group therapy.
It's not for you. Is it for anybody? Do you think it's even effective?
I think maybe if the group's more targeted, but in the hospital they just kind of throw everybody together, so you have like the really confused patients together with the people. Like,
Yeah, it's like
the
a strange
patients
mixed
talking
bag.
about, yeah, like how they want to kill different people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then you have like the depressed patients and everything else. So it's just like this weird, like I don't know how they possibly manage it so that every person in that group can get something out of it, because there's just way too diverse and array of needs.
A guy just talked about wanting to like commit homicides, and then you're like, all right, let's transition into that. I like feel depressed, like it's just
exactly. Or like, there was this guy talking about like really, really awful things, and then they all, okay, now we're gonna practice meditation. It's like,
that's almost comical.
Seriously? Yeah, like it was so ridiculous. So he actually said something that brought up a lot of trauma for me.
Oh, really?
It was clearly unresolved. So I went back to my room. I had a major panic attack. The facilitator for the group actually came in to check on me. She couldn't make any progress with me, so she went and got my regular psych nurse, and basically we couldn't get anywhere, so they decided the best course of action was just to sedate me and try again the next day.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was like this.
Yeah, you had
really did get worse.
You had the moment of clarity, and then those steps were awful. Like, I mean, that sounds so painful. I mean, okay, they were just straight up, all right, well, we'll sedate her and we'll try again another day.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was almost like the most humane thing to do.
Do you remember at that time what you were feeling or what you were like saying and what you were experiencing?
I don't think I was really saying anything. I think I was just, I don't know, like there was just so much grief of like, how did it come to this? This is not, I think I remember like my last thought before I was completely sedated, just being like, my life wasn't supposed to go this way.
Dang. So okay. So you're starting to take those first steps. They turn out pretty rough. They sedate you. What's the next step?
The next step is to try again the next day. And things did start to get a little bit easier every day. I started, like I said, in that night, that moment of clarity, that I was going to be an active participant in my treatment plan. So I would like do research on the stuff that I would talk about with a psychiatrist, and just really try and be an active participant in my own improvement, because I think like there's the best psychologist in the world can't fix you if you don't want it.
100%. If you don't want to learn how to fish, it's going to be really difficult to start being a fisherman, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you see patients in there who expect to be fixed by the staff, and they're the ones that don't really make any progress because they don't see that they have to do the work. There's just people there who can guide them to do the work and to keep them safe until they're able to keep themselves safe.
And I like what you said. You were like, when it comes to the work, you take like the small steps every day. And I haven't really seen the show, but there was this one scene in it that I always come back to. I think it's called like, I don't know. But anyway, there's this runner, and he goes up to this guy who's laying on the ground. He's just been running all day, but he's just starting his like marathon journey, almost like that guy we were talking about.
Yeah.
The fat guy. And he's like, it gets easier. And the other guy goes, what? It gets easier. You have to do it every day. That's the hard part, but it gets easier.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. That one just really hit me. But yeah, so you kind of start that thinking, all right, I just got to do this every day. It does get easier. You're starting to experience it somewhat, that it does get easier every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And to acknowledge that there will be harder days, you know,
Right.
It's not all
Right.
going to get easier.
It's not a linear progression. No, definitely not. No.
Not at all. It's one step forward, two steps back sometimes.
Yeah. Which, man, I mean, it's tough out here. It's not easy. You know, none of this is easy. Even with a lot of the things that I've been given. I mean, I'm a middle class white male who has all my senses. Like, even that is like, you know, what is there to complain about? But man, it's not easy for anybody out here.
No, it's not. And we all have our things. You know, like suffering's not a competition.
Right.
Because, you know, I think we feel like, oh, somebody suffers more, so we can't acknowledge our own suffering. It's not a competition.
Yeah, that's an important thing to take note of too, for sure. Okay, so you're taking the next steps. So you get out of this area, and where do you go?
So that was actually in the IPU. So I had been moved by that point.
Okay.
So I got out of the IPU, and then there was just like a lot of outpatient, like daily outpatient, like check-ins and everything. They would call me and be like, okay, what are you eating?
Okay.
Like
very specific and detailed.
Yeah, like I felt like a bit of, like kind of like a 5-year-old. Like, have you been eating all your veggies?
Oh man.
Or like, you know, and just like really intensive like outpatient therapy, continuing on with the skills that they were teaching in the hospital, because as you say, you have to practice it every day or you lose it. And I think people forget that, and they're like, they learn a new skill like CBT or something, cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness or whatever it is, and they're like, okay, I'm a master of this now. I learned it. It's perfect. I'm gonna do this. And then day 2, it doesn't work. And then they're like, well, I'm doing everything I can. Why isn't this working? It just doesn't work. I'm going to give up. But it's literally, it's a choice that you make every single day.
It's something you have to practice every day. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. It's important to keep up every day. And it's something that I struggle with. I think a lot of people do is understanding and believing, look, I have to do this every day. It's something you practice. Yeah. You practice like meditation. You practice cognitive behavioral therapy. You know? You
don't just like one day wake up and you're like, oh, I'm
You don't just do it.
Yeah. No, it's like anything. It's like learning like a musical instrument or whatever you want to learn, or learning to cook. I don't know, like
100%. So you're starting to learn. You're starting to learn these processes. You're realizing that you have to do them every day, and that it is a practice. You're having your ups and downs. You're taking your 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Your partner is with you. What are you experiencing now?
So things were really starting to come together. And it's always like this kind of scary thing because you're always waiting for
the next shoe to drop.
the other shoe to drop. Exactly. Like you have so many years of like this conditioning of like, okay, I'm fine now, but I'm going to start to spiral again. So for me, it was just, and it still is, it's really a process of taking that pain and turning it into purpose. So finding, why am I doing this? Why am I getting up every day? What am I doing to every day to leave the world a little bit better than I found it? So, you know, I started to write my book and share things that way with people and do interviews and things like that. And now I'm writing, actually recording. We're almost done now. My newest album, which is kind of almost like a soundtrack for the book. So
okay.
yeah.
Well, congratulations! You're almost done with that, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, and check out her book, guys. It's called "Holding On" by Letting Go, and yeah, tell people where they can find that, Heather.
Yeah, they can find it on Amazon or Audible, Apple Books, Google Play Books, basically wherever you find books.
Pretty much anywhere, yeah.
As an ebook, as an audiobook, and in print.
Cool. So you start working on these projects. It gives you purpose. You're like, I'll hopefully make things better, and that gives me something to live for each day.
Yeah.
Do you start to feel more gratitude toward the things that you do have? I know you experienced it somewhat, you know, when that code blue happened a while ago.
Yeah.
But are you doing it on a daily? Do you have to practice it, or does it just come to you now?
No, it's definitely, it's gotten easier, but I don't know that it will ever be something that will just happen. I think it's always something that I will need to keep up on, like, to use your running analogy, right? Like if you stop running, you're gonna be less fit. So it's something that you definitely, if you want that fitness or that, you know, mental fitness, I guess you have to keep up on it every day. But yeah, no, definitely it's like, there's moments where I just stop and think of everything that's happened since the hospital, or even like thinking of the hospital, like if that doctor hadn't wanted to do the paperwork that day, or, you know, if things had worked out just that little bit differently, if it had been a different doctor, I don't know, you know, then things would have, or if that person hadn't come in with the code blue, even, you know, how differently things could have worked out. So I feel really like fortunate that timing kind of worked out, I guess, in my favor.
Or if you didn't take that very last step and go to the hospital.
That too.
Dang. But thank you so much for being here. I wish we could talk a little bit more, but and I just have a couple more questions, and we're more of a loose, you know, funnier podcast.
Yeah, totally.
And so I mean, have you seen like Daredevil or
oh
you
my
know,
God, everyone asks me that, and no, I haven't seen it. That movie ruined my life.
What?
Ever since Daredevil came out, people are like, "Oh, do you see better the rain?"
Yeah,
like,
you have like bats, like Sonic powers.
Like the dude, what is it? He sees better in the rain or something? I get like, I've never even seen it, but I feel like I kind of know what it's about.
Yeah. I mean, just his other senses have like increased drastically because he can't see, right?
Yeah.
And he's just like a super badass, like super strong guy.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah,
So that's what you are, right?
Totally. Yeah. Everybody always asks me like, "Oh, so you must have like super senses like, for everybody, everything else." Like, yeah. No,
but actually, though, do you? I mean, it's impossible to know because you've always been blind. But do you ever feel the sense that you have like better hearing or better like sense of smell than the people around you?
I don't think it's like better, like genetically better or anything. I think it's just more refined.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I suppose that's a better way to put it. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah, I hate that movie. I've never even seen it.
Oh, that's amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much, Heather. This has been a really cool experience for me. I was kind of nervous at first, but we kind of loosened up a little bit.
Thank you so much for having me and giving me the chance to tell my story.
Yes, absolutely. No problem. keep doing what you're doing. Keep sharing your story. I think it is really inspiring to a lot of people. And again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
And good luck with everything.
Thank you.